There is a secret that most pro athletes, elite CEOs, and high performers all know. They all have a group of world-class coaches working for them to help them optimize their potential. At SuperAthlete Radio, our goal is to provide you with the caliber of world-class coaches and guests to help you unlock your potential, dominate your industry, and dominate your life. Let's get better today. And Marco, welcome to SuperAthlete Radio. How are you today?
Thank you for having me. I'm good. How about yourself?
I'm fantastic, and I am really excited to have you on. A few weeks ago, we had a sports scientist on by the name of Don Moxley, who is considered kind of in the United States one of the foremost sports scientists with heart rate variability training, HRV. And then I would say, in terms of globally, you're definitely in that category. So I'm really excited to build off that Don Moxley episode. If you could talk a little bit about how you got into heart rate variability in the first place and why you feel it's so important, why it's such an interesting topic.
Yeah, sure. So I have a background in computer science and engineering. So I was actually a bit far from all of this at the beginning, working in technology. And I don't know, maybe during my studies, I wasn't really finding something that would pique my interest as much until I had the opportunity to work on some of what we now call wearables, but this was 15 years ago. So it was just prototypes of sensors that could measure things from the body, right? So brain waves and heart activity and all of that. And that really got me interested into how I could apply some of the skills that I had in terms of, computer science and engineering and data science and building the tools, but to capture basically the body's response to different things that we are doing. So maybe how physiology changes as fitness changes, or how different stressors impact us. And from there, we got into heart rate variability as this marker of the stress response. And later, maybe we go a bit deeper into that. But it was just, had this opportunity to start working with these sensors a long time ago. And then it got me really interested into these aspects of physiology and stress, and how we can use technology to capture things that maybe are not so obvious otherwise.
And then one of the things we do with our clients at SuperAthlete Inside Training Camp is we provide them a wearable. Why do you feel tracking heart rate variability is important?
Yeah, so it's one of maybe very few ways we have to track how the body is responding to stress. And stress is obviously so key to everything in life. So sometimes we apply stress, for example, in terms of different training regimes or intensities and things like that, hoping to see a certain response. Sometimes we just have to deal with stressors because maybe things are coming our way in work or family and things like that. Sometimes we might get sick, or we might have some behaviors that also impact our body. Everything eventually is stress, and how we cope with that, how that changes over time, I think it's key in terms of health and performance. And that's why heart rate variability can be an important piece, because it's basically the one non-invasive way to try to get insight into the stress response.
That's so important. And then when I'm looking at a lot of your work, one of the key things that you continually want to communicate to your audience and the people that read your work is that having a higher heart rate variability and then having a low heart rate variability, a lot of that is genetic, and it's not necessarily just because you have a low heart rate variability, that does not mean that you're necessarily stressed out. It's about finding that baseline. Could you talk a little bit about what's the best way for us to find our baseline?
Yeah, that's a great point, because it's only natural when we measure something to start by comparing it with other people, or trying to see what's a good value or what's a frame of reference. But heart rate variability is one of those things where there isn't really a well-established frame of reference for anyone. So when we start collecting data and we get a number, which is our heart rate variability, that doesn't really mean much. So we need to build this frame of reference, this baseline, or sometimes we call it normal range. That means that is your normal, your optimal range, in which you should fall in on most days when you take a measurement, unless there's maybe more stress, and then you would be, for example, with heart rate variability that is lower than your normal, and that means there is higher stress on your body. So the best way to capture this data is just to start measuring. There's different ways. You can do it with a wearable, as you were mentioning before, typically devices that measure during the night, or we can also measure first thing in the morning with apps and other tools that allow you to take that type of spot check measurement. Both methods are good. The important part is really to try to do these type of measurements at rest, which would mean, again, either as you sleep or first thing in the morning before you get to start your routine, before you eat, exercise, and things like that. You start collecting these resting measurements, and after, I would say, at least a couple of days, but ideally a couple of weeks, you get an idea of what's your normal range. And then from that, you are establishing your frame of reference, and you can start looking on a day-to-day basis where your data is going and try to make maybe some small changes there.
And I'm really excited to hear about what you've seen in terms of small changes that work. But really quick, in terms of ways to measure it. So something like the Oura Ring or like a Whoop strap, when we check that in the morning, what that is doing is it's checking your HRV kind of on average throughout the night. Is that correct? And then what you just compare that to is what you said as a spot check in terms of potentially checking your HRV kind of in the moment, in the morning?
That's right. So you have these two, I would say, established ways where there is also a lot of research where these protocols have been applied in many different contexts to measure HRV and see how it changes in response to different stressors. The important part is that you should really pick one. So if you like to use a wearable, then use that, and then you compare your night data over time. If you prefer to just use an app and measure in the morning, then do that. The two ways are not necessarily interchangeable. So, when you stick to a protocol, then you start collecting data, and then you can look at how things change over time. I would say these are the two best ways to capture these measurements, because what happens then outside of this context will impact the data acutely, so just in the short term, and that doesn't really mean much. We always experience stressors that can be okay. Sometimes there are confounders that have nothing to do with stress. For example, even just eating or drinking water, all sorts of things will impact your HRV on a minute by minute basis, actually. And those kind of things, we don't really want to see those in the data. That's why we capture the data at rest. And then the major stressors that really have an impact on your body, those will be captured also many hours later in the resting measurements.
And then I'd love to talk about how having your heart rate variability lower than your baseline, how that can potentially negatively impact your performance in terms of athletically, and then also for all our non-athletes who listen, just in terms of like day-to-day cognitive functioning and energy levels. When we had Don Moxley on, when he was at Ohio State University, and he worked with wrestlers there. And by the time that the season was done, for the best wrestlers that would go into these, the final tournament, this All-American tournament, he was able to see who was going to lose early, who was going to do well, and then who was going to win All-American just off HRV scores. Could you talk a little bit in terms of how HRV negatively impacts performance? Let's start with athletically, and then we can talk about in other ways.
Yeah, for sure. So, what we see basically in these cases is that we have simply a negative response to the stressors that we are facing. So as an athlete, if you go through training and other stressors, of course, because there isn't only training in an athlete's life, but there's a combination of things, then what you normally want to see is that HRV stays stable over time. That means that we respond well. It does not mean that we don't face stressors, but it means that once we face the stressors, we bounce back quickly. That's really the important part. So this is not about avoiding stress. On the contrary, actually, especially, these athletes, they train hard, but then they also bounce back quickly. And that's why the measurement is also important to do it at certain times, which we were saying before, either the night or the morning, because then after training, there is a period where you are acutely suppressed, but that's okay. And then you bounce back to normal. And if you bounce back quickly, the following measurement, you are already again in your normal range. instead, if you do not bounce back quickly and then you have a suppression and then you end up in the case that you're describing, then it means that simply we did not respond well to that stimulus. So the stimulus maybe was too much. It could be in the case of training, maybe it was just too much of the training stimulus for the body to recover quickly. And that would prompt maybe the coaching staff to make some changes, right? Maybe we modulate training a bit differently so we avoid that dip. Or it could be that training was actually dealt with fine, but there is other stressors and sometimes other things happen and then affect us negatively. And if we see that multiple days or chronically over a long period of time, then something is going off there. So something is basically impacting the body in a negative way so that we have negative chronic stress response. HRV is one of the parameters that could highlight that as a suppression, and that could mean that we might have issues in terms of performance or injuries. I wouldn't say that it's that one-to-one relationship, right? It's complex, right? So it's a marker of stress. Sometimes people can still perform at their best even in a situation like that. So the data never defines the outcome, I would say, but at the same time it's an indication, right? So if we want to learn something from that process, then maybe we look at what we did, what was the response, and then we think, hey, maybe here we can adjust things a bit differently, and next time we stay in that more stable optimal range, and that typically gives us better odds at the end. Yeah, so I think it can be a combination of factors. In terms of training, typically that might lead to the training stimulus that we further apply when we are in that state not to be assimilated properly in a way that then we don't make the same progress in performance, for example, that we would have made otherwise. And we can see this in some studies where, for example, people are separated in different groups, and in one group, they would just keep going according to the plan that they had. So a certain training program, some days you go hard, some days you go easy, everything that you would expect from normal, periodization. But then in the other group, when there is an HRV suppression, then if there was some high intensity work on that day, that is reduced in intensity. So we would still train, maybe, especially if you are at the highest level, it's not that you don't train, but then you don't train as hard on that day. So you train a bit lower intensity because it's really the intensity that creates the disruption in the autonomic response. It's not just the training or the volume, typically it's really the intensity. So you reduce that. And what we see in these studies typically quite consistently is that at the end of the study, this group, where they reduced training intensity because HRV was suppressed, they will maybe accumulate less high intensity training, and you would think that maybe that leads to suboptimal performance. But instead, this group performs better than the one that did all the high intensity sessions, but they did them also in situations in which basically the body could not assimilate them and respond to them positively and progress in terms of performance, because probably there was too much stress on the body, as highlighted by a lower HRV. So that's why I think it's important to look at these things, because it's not just what we do in terms of training, but it's clearly also about when we do it. And HRV can give us some insights in there to modulate things and make some small adjustments so that at the end, what we improve is really performance, which is what matters.
And you mentioned there that specifically volume did not impact HRV that much. It was intensity that really impacted it.
That's right. So there's other studies where they really looked at this, measured HRV before training and after training. And the training, they did it at different intensities and of different durations. And if you kept the intensity low, training, for example, for 1 hour on the bike or 2 hours on the bike would lead to exactly the same response. So no change in HRV if the intensity is low. While for the high intensity work, any intensity above, first lactate or ventilatory threshold, that would cause a disruption in HRV that then would last hours, basically.
That's really interesting. Okay, we have a number of people, most of our audience are in the entrepreneur business space, and stress management, resiliency, these are topics that consistently come up. I'm dealing with all this stress. Could you talk a little bit about, I guess, first, if someone came to you from that space and say, hey, I'm looking to perform at an even higher level with my business, with my family, with my, what I do on weekends, whether it's running Spartan races or getting ready for a marathon or something like that, what can I do to help manage this stress? How would you respond to that?
Yeah. So I think in this case, I would say one of the best things about HRV is that it's just a marker of stress, right? It's not about training. So it's applied a lot there, and I'll get to that in a second, talking about the reasons why, but it's just a marker of stress. And as such, is sensitive to most stressors, but it's not really specific to something. So if there is a suppression in HRV, you cannot know what was it unless you know all the context, and then maybe you can make an educated guess if it is your own life or your athletes and you know what is happening. But the reason why we use it a lot in training is that modulating the stressor is easier, right? So if the stressor is training, you can adjust training. But then in a professional life, if the stressor is work and there is something really important going on or really stressful going on and it's gonna stretch, for days or weeks or more, then you don't always have the possibility to make a change directly on the stressor. So then maybe instead of you can always attack it from two angles, I would say. There is the reducing the stressor, but if you cannot do that, then you can try to improve or dedicate more time to the things that basically are improving recovery instead of reducing the stressor itself. And that would be, for example, even just trying to take care of your sleep routine, really the basics, getting the sleep you need, eating well, all the typical things that then have a positive impact on your physiology and recovery and typically HRV in a way that you can see that. And that would allow you also maybe to buffer a bit better that stress and then to handle that a bit better. So the way you use the data is very similar. You would take your measurements, you would track it over time. After a while, you would understand what's your normal values. Typically, your scores are around certain numbers and you see them there. And then when you have suppressions or changes, you try to modulate the stressors you can modulate, or you try to favor recovery strategies, so to speak, so that you try to stay within this optimal range. If, on the other hand, you see consistent suppressions when you do certain things, and you were mentioning before, maybe you are busy at work and still you want to train for some big event and you do a lot in the weekend, and that's quite typical, right? And then maybe when you have these sessions, you always see a large suppression. That's quite a clear signal that that's a bit much for your body. It does not mean that you did good work, right? Because sometimes people think, okay, really want to see the suppressions in the data, that means I did a good session. But it doesn't really work like that, because when you are fit and able to assimilate the stimulus and to respond well to the training you did, then you bounce back quickly and you should see the data within your normal range without large suppressions. If you see the suppressions, I would always say, okay, maybe let's try to go a bit more gradually, building up towards your goal, make some changes there and see if we can keep things a bit more stable. If you see the best athletes in the world and you look at their data, they train really hard, right? They are the best and they train the hardest probably, but there is very rarely a suppression. It's pretty much all the time within their normal range, unless there are stressors that have nothing to do with training, because they are fit and they can handle the stimulus, and the stimulus is appropriate for their fitness at a certain time. And there maybe is where the recreational athletes are messing up sometimes, right? The stimulus is not really appropriate. Sometimes we overdo things, and the data can help you maybe figure out when are those moments and make some changes there.
That's really good. Yeah, just the fastest way to improve anything is to measure it. So I think that's one of the things that makes HRV so important, I think, for general population. Other thing that I found that works really well is to share your scores with, you can do it with your family members or whoever, people who are kind of in the space with you, workers. That I have found kind of has an audience effect, provides a higher level of accountability. And then also, just because your scores drop after you train, that's not necessarily a positive thing. What you're saying is because potentially your body just is not as responding as well to it's not the optimal training. So you're saying ideally you do want to stay within baseline, or you want to stay within baseline within 24, 48, 72 hours? As long as it's, what's the time frame where it gets back to baseline where you say, okay, this amount of workload works?
Yeah, so I would say there is always a normal suppression, typically after hard sessions, where you bounce back in a few hours. So what you see in the data depends a bit also on how you measure it. For example, measuring in the night and the morning, we said both are valid, but obviously the night comes first, right? The morning comes later, because when you get an average of the night, again, that's an average. So it takes everything from the moment you went to bed to when the moment you wake up. Well, when you measure in the morning, it's when you wake up. So you add at least, 6-8 hours more, let's say, to go through that recovery process. So if you exercise in the evening, for example, or you have a game in the evening, you play in the evening, and then you measure your HRV in the night. In those situations, you might have a suppression that is not something to worry about. It's just normal because you're measuring very close to the stressor. So in that case, I wouldn't worry if I measured in the night and I did, a workout late, maybe with high intensity, and then in the morning I see the data of the night that is suppressed. I would say, okay, we just give it another day. And then the night after, most likely you're not doing two high intensity sessions in the same way. Typically, there's high intensity and low intensity sort of alternating. So you expect things to bounce back quickly the day after. If you do measure in the morning, I would say normally you want to see it already back to normal on the first day. So if you measure in the night, just be a bit more, a bit less reactive, I would say, to the data, because if you see a suppression, you can say, okay, maybe I had this late stressor, just give it another day, and then you want to bounce back to normal. If you're still suppressed after 2 days, then definitely too long, I would say.
And then when we're talking about stressors on the body, we're not just talking about, okay, this situation is stressing me out. It's potentially the quality of sleep that we're getting, what kind of environment we're exposing ourselves to, what foods we're eating. I love to tactically go into the weeds a little bit in terms of what some best practices are in terms of that have you found directly in terms of helping your HRV get back to baseline. Let's start with sleep. What are some things that you have found are like, okay, this really helps, don't do this?
Well, on my end, I would say really just covering the basics typically is very important. And then, the nuance or the differences is typically something individual. So maybe it's something you learn looking at your data. But as covering the basics, normally I mean, a consistent sleep routine and getting the sleep you need, which, as we know, it does not mean that it's this amount of hours, right? It's an amount of hours for you, right? Maybe for you it can be 6, for someone else it could be 8.5. But we know what we need typically, especially in situations in which we have certain other stressors, right? Obviously, if I'm training a lot, I'm going to need more sleep than when I'm training less, right? So those things are not fixed, they change, and that's why it's also, I think, useful to get the feedback, because you can see then how the body responds to different situations. So I would say, consistent sleep routine. If you need extra sleep during the day, and you can take naps and things based on being flexible with work and things like that, that typically can help recover. Light physical activity, things like even low intensity exercise, but even just walking and things like that, typically have a positive effect. We were saying before about the impact of duration and intensity on HRV. And when they look at low intensity exercise, so maybe 50-60% of VO2 max, so low intensity exercise, but still, cycling or running, we're not talking walking here. Typically after the exercise session, HRV is either where it was before or slightly increased. So this type of exercise might be also beneficial for recovery and HRV in general. So it could be, something to add to your routine even on those days, and to keep the intensity low but still do some of the volume, and that might improve your recovery. Yeah, I would say eating, of course, eating again what you need and healthy, and even that is difficult to, I think, to pick things because the individual matters, right? But that's also, I think, where we learn looking at the data, because then we can try different things and see how we respond, and then maybe there are small differences that can be helpful for some and not for others.
Yeah, I'm a huge believer in getting steps and then getting out, and we call it performance stacking, but if you got to do work, try and do it where you can do it while getting steps. There's actually a study done at Stanford by a researcher named Kelly McGonigal where there's an actual number where if we don't get 4,600, which is not that high of a number, but 4,600 steps a day, that literally raises anxiety and stress within people. So with what you just said, that completely correlates with that. And then, if I understand correctly, you're a competitive endurance athlete, or you have been in the past?
Just recreational, I would say. I mean, I train and I race, but I'm not a professional.
Sure, yeah. And then how have you used HRV in your own?
Yeah, so for me, I use it, a bit in the ways we discussed so far. I would put myself in the cluster of people we discussed earlier, maybe where we have, our job and a demanding job. I run a small business and things like that. But I also care about, my training and my training goals. So in the data, typically what I see more in terms of stressors is work-related stressors, right? Because those are maybe bigger concerns for me or issues than training is. So maybe it's been 10, 15 years since I've developed, some of the tools used to track heart rate variability. So I have, that much data over the years, and I could see quite consistently, periods with high work-related stress leading to suppressions in HRV. So there was this phase in which you simply learn about these things. You understand that, hey, these stressors that maybe I thought could lead to suppressions and maybe, exercise or other things are actually not doing that. Are actually, responding well and feeling better mentally and all of that when I do that. But these other things that, I think are also key, obviously, to what I do on a day-to-day basis, can have a negative impact in certain situations. So then you learn maybe to manage that a bit differently, to change also your priorities slightly if you can, right? So, I'm not a professional, but for me, exercising every day now became very high priority, right? So if I start working, work never ends. So if I exercise, when I'm done, I'm done. So high priority for exercise, and then we also work. So it's, you learn, I think, to manage things in a way that eventually works a bit better for you, so that you avoid, those periods of chronic suppressions and things that then can lead also to negative health situations, so to speak, regardless of performance.
Okay, so just to clarify, because this is really helpful, a couple things that you do to help keep your HRV at baseline is to make sure that you exercise every day. And then also you mentioned something about when you're done. Was that talking about work, or was that talking about exercise, or was that?
I was saying that in the context of exercise, meaning that, I give it high priority because it's clearly time limited. While with work, there is always something more to do. That's why then I end up prioritizing exercise and then the rest. But I would say that, those are Yeah, the main things, looking at the data, then especially when you start having, I would say, more chronic suppressions, not just on the day-to-day, if there is a suppression, maybe you think, okay, let's see how I feel subjectively. If, maybe it's something, you're getting sick, something that really requires that you make some changes, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's just, some transitory stressors that was there and impacted your data, but it's not necessarily impacting your day. I think over time we learn to distinguish this. And then maybe you don't need to be so reactive, like we were saying before. Maybe also you had an evening session and you measure in the night, less on this reactive. But then if you have 2-3 days with these suppressions, then maybe you start asking yourself, hey, what is happening here? How can I give priority to recovery, and how can keep things in balance so that I avoid this equation to get even worse? So that's how I try to use the data on a day-to-day basis in the context of work training and things. And sometimes we just accept that maybe there is a negative situation because maybe you've been a bit sick and then you're traveling for work and then there is this other thing that you need to do. So sometimes the data simply reflect that it's a period with particularly high stress. It's a bit difficult maybe to work around that. So I think we need to learn also to live with this in a healthy way, right? Not to let it affect us negatively all the time. So we look at the data and say, okay, this phase, now we'll give it, a couple of days, a week until we are normalized, and then everything goes back to normal, and we don't need to stress ourselves further just because the data shows the situation that, we are a bit stressed, and we also sort of know that already. Because that I think can also impact negatively people sometimes, right? Things get a bit in your head, the scores are negative and things like that. But I think it's important to take a step back, realize that, okay, we are just assessing this period. Always think about the big picture and try to make some small changes if you can, and then things will go back to normal.
There's so much good stuff there. Yeah, that's like the number one thing I find so valuable with HRV. Yeah, it's super important from an athletic performance and a peak performance perspective. But this idea of, I like it because it's like proactively doing things to respond to stress rather than to react, like you said. I mean, so many people in my space, we do millions of things in terms of longevity and anti-aging, but really the number one thing by far that shortens lives is stress. So to proactively attack that, I think, is what I really find most valuable to it. And I think HRV is a great tool to be able to do that. Don Moxley again, he has found that a certain strand of CBD has potentially can improve HRV. He's working with a group that has created a product called HRV Plus. I'm big into adaptogens. There's a number of adaptogens and herbs that research has shown that they de-stress, which potentially is going to translate into improving HRV. Have you found anything in terms of herbs, adaptogens, something like that CBD strand? Have you found that works to improve
No, I would
HRV,
say it's not something I've looked into or investigated. So yeah, I don't have insights there. I think the only thing I can add maybe is that one of the interesting things here is that you're really looking at how the individual responds, right? So you will see that, in studies and research, typically, we report at what changed at the group level, and that, what worked in general for that type of people might not really work for you. But the nice aspects here is that you can, try these things and see how data changes, your response to the things you do, and in terms also of behaviors and, supplements and other things. And that can inform, if it makes sense for you to continue in a certain way or try something else. I just want to add that when we look at these things, typically in studies, we look at it quite acutely, I would say. So in the very short term, so maybe, you take something and then you measure again and you see some acute change. This is similar also for things like mindfulness or deep breathing practice and things like that, where you would acutely impact the data by, doing the breathing and things like that, or measure just right after. But we don't look as much as at longer term changes. Those are much more complicated also to understand because a lot is happening at the same time. So I think it's also important to try to focus on that, see also, the bigger picture, if these changes are lasting or not. For example, coming back to biofeedback and mindfulness, there's many reasons to do that, let's say, but it does not seem to lead necessarily to changes in your physiology or HRV in the long term. It does very acutely in the short term, but in the long term, the evidence is more conflicting. So I think it's always a bit difficult to look at things in the long term, but also very important so that we understand a bit better. And sometimes also because, sometimes people start measuring HRV and making some changes, but they need us to know and remember that these changes in physiology are also driven by other things, like, for example, seasonality. So there tends to be a pattern, in HRV tends to be a bit lower in the winter months and a bit higher in the summer months. So if you start measuring your HRV in October or November and winter is coming for you in December and January, and you make some good, healthy lifestyle changes, but your HRV still is stable or decreasing, I mean, it's not necessarily mean that you're making the wrong choices. So always give it time, look really at the big picture. I mean, the devices we have and the tools, they tend to really push much the day-to-day and the reactivity of, today it's low, rest, today is high, go hard. I would argue a bit against that. Like, let's try to take a step back and look at things, over weeks and months and, years, ideally, in response to different changes, and then see what works for you and try to see, what leads to better values and makes you also feel better and things like that.
And then has there been any research on why HRV is potentially higher in the summer than the winter?
No, I mean, there is research that shows the data, but the reasoning behind it and the motivations, I don't think they are so clear. Yeah.
And then you mentioned there at the end that just because your HRV score is lower on a particular day does not mean that you need to potentially adjust what you had planned for that day. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about two cases. One case is a bit of an outlier, so let's talk first about that. It's more rare. It's maybe the case in which you are competing as an athlete or as a professional. It's an important day for you. In this day, you might have a different form of stress, right? You might be like stressed because you're ready to perform. There might be higher sympathetic activity, so to speak, and that is not necessarily bad. Actually, there is very little research on this, but the one study that is out there shows that, I think this was maybe Winter Olympics athletes, the ones that actually had a more suppressed HRV on race day, they performed better. This is to say that, on these days, the data can be anywhere. It's, it depends on, you might just be really ready to perform, depending also on when to measure and things like this. The sleep is not ideal typically the night before one event like that, and that is totally fine. So it does not mean that you will not perform well, because we are talking about just an acute change, right? A day. It's not that you had 2 months of suppressed data that clearly shows that something went really wrong, there was chronic stress and maybe health issues and so on. It's just a day. So that's a bit of an outlier. Maybe that's why also it's more difficult to study, but I would always say, okay, if you have some big day, don't get stressed because you have, a low score. That might be also a sign that you're going to perform particularly well, in fact, based on this research. Now, outside of this, let's say outlier or more rare case, on the day-to-day, when you have a suppression, that typically means, especially if there is no particular event that is supposed to stress you out, but mean that way, it means that maybe you have responded poorly or had some cumulative stress response that is not ideal. You were not able to bounce back to normal. So in those cases, I would argue maybe it's a good idea to try to see what could have caused, and then we try to learn from that make some changes for the following days to avoid that you end up in that situation. And for training, it could be assessing the intensity and what you did with respect to what you did previously, or your fitness with other stressors. It could be all sorts of things depending on your life.
That's really helpful. And it's just, this is something that's been communicated, but just really this idea of just looking at it like it's a data point. And then I think something that you've brought to the table here is just really understanding what your baseline is, and taking a long view, taking a long game approach, and looking at it that way, rather than, okay, this is just one day, so I'm going to completely adjust what I had planned because of that. And to know that you can still perform at a really high level with the low HRV. Marco,
Exactly.
how do you currently use HRV?
So I think 11 years ago, I built an app which is called HRV for training, which is what I use to measure HRV. I use also some wearables to track, because obviously, as is my work, I'm curious to see differences between morning and night and things like that. So I take my measurements in the morning, sitting up. There is some research that shows that when you have a slightly different protocol from lying down or sleeping, which is a state that is highly parasympathetic, right? You're sleeping or resting, and you're in the highest parasympathetic state doing a 24-hour cycle. If you sit up, you basically add this orthostatic stressor. It just means that you sit up and then your body needs to readjust, right? You need to rebalance everything because you have changed body position. So if you measure shortly after changing body position and sitting up or standing up, I would say sitting is easier typically. Standing maybe is much of a change. You sit up and you measure within 30-60 seconds. Then your body's response is somewhat amplified. So for example, just to give you an example, I had some night data in which I was sick for one night, and my resting heart rate was particularly high that night, right? And then the nights after, again, while sleeping, the data was back to my baseline. So it was perfectly on average, basically. When I measure sitting up, that morning, the first morning, the heart rate is much higher. So if in the night maybe it was 60 instead of 50, sitting up was maybe 75. So you get a much higher response because you basically challenge the body and then you measure right after. And so it doesn't normalize quickly enough because there is a lot of stress. And then you measure the second day and the third day, and you see that the heart rate goes down slowly. So the second day maybe is 65 and the third day is 55, while in the night data is always 50. So this sort of protocol makes it a bit more useful. It's a bit like measuring, resting glucose or measuring after a glucose tolerance test, right? So you ingest carbs and you see what the body does instead of just measuring at rest. And this is similar. Instead of just measuring at rest, you sit up and then you measure your HRV and heart rate to see how quickly basically you go back to normal and things like that. So that's the protocol I use for people that have a particularly low heart rate. I think that's particularly useful because otherwise you might see very little changes in resting heart rate and in HRV if you measure when you're fully rested, while sitting up might be better. So I use it that way, take the measurements, and then, build this normal range so I know more or less what's my normal, where I expect the data to be on a given day if there is no higher stressors. And then if there is a suppression, typically if I feel good, I will still proceed as planned. If the suppression continues for 2 or 3 days, then I make some changes, right? In training, maybe I push high intensity training. I do this kind of things that we discussed today to try to see if we can get back into the normal range quickly and then stay there. Normally, that would be the case. Now, again, it's been so many years that you know more or less the things that work and that don't work. And you also know that typically you can perform, like we were saying before, on a day in which the data is particularly low, but it might not be the best time to assimilate the training stimulus. So if you're racing, I would say don't worry, you can still do it. But if you're training, maybe it's smarter not to do it that day.
And then when you developed the HRV for training app, you said 10 years ago? It's amazing.
Yeah, that's right.
Where did you kind of see the need in the market? What do you feel like, who can most value from that, you feel?
Yeah. So it's I would say the main thing is that it's simpler. What I mean is that you don't need sensors. So at that time, you could only measure with chest straps. Right now, you can do that with the straps, or you can do that with wearables. With the app, you can just use the phone camera. So there were some tools that allowed you to measure heart rate using the phone at that time, and then basically the steps that we added were, to try to do that more accurately, so that you can actually get to heart rate variability. And then you just, in the morning, wake up, sit up, take the phone, put your finger on the camera, take your measurements, and you don't need anything else. And we did also validations in which we showed that this is equivalent to using a chest strap or using a full ECG and electrocardiogram also. So the data is valid, but you don't need anything else. It's just the simplest way you have to get started with this kind of things if you're curious, and if you maybe don't want to invest in wearables and other things.
Simple, yet works. Powerful. I love that. And in terms of people having different baselines for HRV, is that genetics that causes that?
I think it's always a combination of things. It is important to understand that there is a strong genetic component. And if our HRV, let's say, is 50 milliseconds in RMSSD, which is one of the parameters typically used, it might not be realistic for us to think, okay, I want to have 150 like this friend of mine, right? So I think it's important to understand that we need to look at how things change relatively for us with respect to our normal, and that's how the data can be useful for all of us. But the absolutes are really difficult to use or compare, and not particularly helpful. There is a genetic component. I try to stress this a lot because people want to use HRV with the goal of improving HRV, while I think HRV can be used with the goal of improving health and performance. So those should be the outcomes, and HRV not necessarily. It could be something that it gives you feedback so that you can make these changes and keep stress in check and health and performance improve, but not necessarily HRV. HRV is just the way you get there. This does not mean, though, that you cannot improve your HRV, right? So I don't want to say that because it's not necessarily true, especially if there is room for improvement in terms of, your stress levels, right? Sleep and your diet, or you have never exercised or regularly, let's say, or things like that, right? So if you make big behavioral changes, for sure, your HRV can also increase dramatically, right? So it depends where you start from, but for many people that are already very healthy and check all the boxes that we said in terms of healthy behaviors and so on, and they have a certain value, I think it's not particularly helpful to just focus on the value and try to increase it. It's more helpful to try to balance stressors, and then that will lead to better health and performance outcomes, regardless of the absolute value of HRV. So it can be improved, especially if there is room for improvement in your behavior and in your life or in the stresses that you face. But it's not the only thing there is, or the main reason to look at it, I would say. The main reason to look at it would be, I think, for day-to-day feedback, weekly and monthly changes in relation to other stressors, and try to make some changes regardless of the absolute value.
Yeah, that's awesome. And again, I just go back to this idea is, the fastest way to improve anything is to measure it. And it's like HRV is something that's really, it's indicative of how you are dealing with stress in your life, both physically and emotionally and environmentally. And again, stress is the number one correlative factor in terms of longevity. So for all those listening that are, really interested in supplements and peptides and stem cells and all this stuff, start here. Start with really being able to conquer stress and learn how to manage it and what your actions day to day, and then that's the foundation I think you could really build on. This has been great, Marco. I'd love to give you a rapid fire here to wrap up. Biggest mentor in your life?
Biggest mentor. Well, I would say I had a professor when I was in the first my first degree at university. That's the person that sent me to play with these prototypes of wearables, and that started basically what has been my work for the past 15 years. So I'm definitely grateful to him.
Best book or research paper that you've read in the last year?
Best book or research paper? Research paper, there is one that I come back to. I was sharing part of it even today on Twitter, that's why it's fresh on my mind. To give you something that is pertinent to the conversation we had today, is Steven Seiler's 2007 paper, in which he looks at all of these things that are basically behind everything that we discussed today in terms of how you use HRV and why it matters in relation to exercise. So suppressions with intensity, no suppressions with changes in duration, quick bounce back from the stressor, quicker if you're fitter, if you're an higher level athlete. So basically the basics of everything that now we have built on top. So that's, I think it's for people interested in this topic in particular, is a very good read. Like maybe I'll send you later a link so you can add it.
And what was his name one more time?
So the author is Steven Seiler. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's great. Okay. Biggest habit that you have added or taken away from your life in the last year that's provided the most benefit from you? Habit in terms of like the biggest one, and or the one that was like it was a small thing but it really impacted your life in a positive way.
Yeah, I would say, well, it's not been a recent thing. In general, I would say no procrastination. I think that's the most important thing. Yeah, on all ends, the things that we do. I think, yeah, it's been important for us.
And then what have you done tactically to overcome procrastination, which is something that's so common?
Yeah, well, I think I was just lucky with this one. You know how different people have different behaviors and motivations, and it's always been yeah, there as something that that didn't impact me negatively, but as part of people's behavior. And when you work with I think with others as well, you realize like how certain routines and structure are sort of maybe innate in the way you do things. Like some athletes might be particularly talented, you might be just yeah, intrinsically more motivated in certain situations. So I think that has been something that I became more aware of later. Yeah.
Self-awareness, rituals and routines.
Yeah, for sure.
Great. Well, this has been super amazing, Marco. And where is the best place for people to find your amazing app?
Well, it's available on the Apple Store and Google Play. It's called HRV for Training. We have a website, which is hrvfortraining.com. And in case you have any questions about HRV and things like that, I'm available on Twitter or Substack, where I try to cover a lot of these topics. So there's a lot there, all of these different areas. But if you have any other doubts or questions, drop me a line and I can try to help.
That's amazing. Yeah, again, one of the values in the app, guys, is beyond, for those that have not yet gone to Wearable or inside SuperAthlete Training Camp, Marco's app gives you the opportunity to track your HRV at a super low, I think it's like $10 a month or something like that?
It's just $10 total.
Is that accurate?
Even better.
$10 total. Yeah, amazing. Yeah, so all you guys listening, go check that out. And Marco, I appreciate your time so much, and I look forward to meeting you in person, whether that's here in the United States or Europe. And God bless you, and keep doing what you're doing.
Same. Thank you so much. Bye.